This video is about the fascinating tactics of American Revolutionary War. Subscribe for more. The year was 1775, and the air crackled with tension in the 13 American colonies. The streets of Boston buzzed with whispers of revolution. The red-coated soldiers of King George Roman III patrolled the cobblestone roads, their brass buttons gleaming ominously under the pale sun. Inside a cramped tavern, a flickering candle illuminated the determined faces of the Sons of Liberty. Among them stood Samuel Adams, a firebrand with piercing eyes that flickered like the flame beside him. He leaned forward, his voice low but fervent, weaving tales of tyranny and liberty. "I say we strike," Adams declared, his hands slamming against the weathered table. The other men leaned in closer, tension hanging in the air like the smoke from their pipes. "Our rights are being trampled, and we cannot stand idly by while the British crown tightens its grip." Across the table, John Hancock, a wealthy merchant with a penchant for grandiosity, nodded vigorously. "We must unite our people. The time has come to take action. A revolution is upon us, and our cause must ignite the hearts of every man, woman, and child in these colonies." As their voices rose in passionate agreement, a shadow crept through the door. It was Paul Revere, the renowned silversmith turned messenger. His face was pale, breathless with urgency. "They're coming. The British are marching this way," he gasped, the room falling silent as the gravity of his words settled upon them. The news struck the gathering like a cannonball. The British troops were heading toward Concord, intent on seizing weapons stored by the colonial militia. The Sons of Liberty knew this was no ordinary skirmish. It was the spark that would ignite the American Revolutionary War. That night, Revere rode through the darkened streets, his horse galloping fiercely. "The British are coming," he shouted, awakening the sleeping townsfolk. His warning echoed through the stillness, rallying the militias scattered across the countryside. In the distance, the sound of drums and marching brutes grew louder, a relentless advance toward confrontation. Meanwhile, in the heart of the colonies, General George Washington prepared his forces. Stationed at a makeshift camp in Virginia, he studied maps strewn across a table while officers discussed strategies under the dim light of lanterns. Washington's brow furrowed with the weight of responsibility. "We must be strategic," he said, his voice steady yet forceful. "The British may have superior training and resources, but we possess the spirit of freedom. We must use every advantage." Across the Atlantic, in Europe, the specter of conflict loomed large. King Frederick Roman II of Prussia watched from his castle, intrigued by the unfolding drama. The colonies were a world away, yet the fires of revolution sparked a sense of curiosity in the brilliant strategist. He pondered the potential for a shift in the balance of power. The American struggle could weaken Britain, and that piqued his interest. Simultaneously, in the Bavarian countryside, a young soldier named Johann Müller polished his musket. He had been conscripted into the British Army, a distant participant in a conflict that felt foreign to him. The whispers of rebellion were lost in the rolling hills, yet he felt an undeniable pull toward the ideals of liberty and self-governance. The sight of his fellow soldiers marching toward America stirred something deep within him, an urge to fight for a cause he barely understood. As the British troops approached Lexington, they were met by a small band of colonial militia. The tension was palpable, the world seemed to hold its breath. A shot rang out, echoing through the dawn. It was the shot heard round the world, a single bullet that shattered the fragile peace. The skirmish ignited chaos. Colonial militiamen, emboldened by their sense of justice, fought fiercely against the disciplined British soldiers. Samuel Adams watched from a distance, his heart racing as he realized the magnitude of this moment. The battle was not just for weapons, it was a fight for independence. In the chaos, Johann Müller found himself torn between duty and conscience. As the musket smoke filled the air, he hesitated, his aim wavering as he trained his rifle on a colonial soldier. The young man's eyes met his, and in that split second, Müller saw more than an enemy. He saw a fellow human driven by hope. Lowering his weapon, he turned away, choosing the path of sympathy over allegiance. As night fell, the townsfolk gathered to mourn their losses. The once celebrated British troops were now seen as oppressors. The air crackled with the fervor of rebellion, and whispers of freedom spread like wildfire. The Sons of Liberty seized the moment, urging towns to rise against the British forces. Meanwhile, Washington strategized with his officers, debating their next move. "Guerrilla tactics," he said, his voice resolute. "We must use the terrain to our advantage, hit them where they least expect it. The British may be a formidable force, but they are not invincible." The months rolled into years, each battle for independence forging the resolve of the colonists. From Bunker Hill to Saratoga, the clashes grew fiercer and the stakes higher. France, witnessing the colonists' struggle, began to take notice. The possibility of an alliance stood in the air, adding another layer to the complex web of war. But amid the turmoil, whispers of betrayal echoed within the ranks. Loyalists clung to the British crown, fostering distrust among neighbours. The struggle was not merely against foreign soldiers, but also against the creeping shadows of division within their own communities. As the conflict escalated, an unexpected player emerged. The group of Hessian mercenaries sent by England to bolster their cause landed on American shores. Their arrival sent shockwaves through the colonies. The men were known for their ruthless efficiency in battle, and their reputation preceded them. The Sons of Liberty knew they had to act quickly. The stakes were higher than ever. The night before their first encounter with the Hessians, Samuel Adams stood on a hill overlooking the camp, the stars glimmering like distant battles yet to be fought. He spoke quietly to Washington, the weight of leadership evident on their shoulders. "This will not just be a battle of arms, but a test of resolve. We stand not only for ourselves, but for generations to come." Washington nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon. "Then we must show them what true resolve looks like," he replied, determination igniting a fire within him. The dawn of the battle arrived, heavy with anticipation. The Hessians advanced with their characteristic precision, but the Americans, fueled by the dream of independence, prepared to meet them with newfound ferocity. As the clamor of battle filled the air, the men fought not only for their lives, but for the very soul of a nation. As the dust began to settle, it became clear that this war would not be won easily. The struggles ahead were fraught with peril, but the call for freedom echoed through the hearts of the revolutionaries. They would face insurmountable odds, betrayals, and sacrifices, yet the flame of liberty burned brightly. In this crucible of conflict, the question loomed larger than ever: would the colonies forge their identity amidst the chaos, or would they succumb to the weight of oppression? The answer lay in the hearts of those fighting on the front lines, and the battles yet to be waged. The stakes had never been higher, and the outcome remained uncertain. The only thing certain was that the war for independence had only just begun. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, the fight for freedom beckoned them all into the unknown, where heroes would rise and destinies would be forged. What lay ahead was a journey that would transcend borders, intertwining the fates of nations and individuals alike. The flicker of liberty had ignited a fire that would soon captivate the world, but first, the flames must endure the trials of war. The next chapter of this storied struggle awaited, and with it, the revelation of tactics that would change the course of history forever. As the weeks turned into months, the Revolutionary War pressed on, bloodied and relentless. The echoes of musket fire and the cries of the fallen became a grim soundtrack for the men and women who fought not just for land, but for their very existence. The battles at Bunker Hill and Saratoga had shifted the tides of war, but they had also drawn the attention of powerful allies across the sea. In France, the corridors of power buzzed with intrigue. King Louis Roman XVI, watching the American struggle unfold, saw an opportunity to strike a blow against his British rivals. Among the courtiers, Franklin's name reverberated with a new sense of importance. The American ambassador, Benjamin Franklin, had become a figure of fascination, a symbol of revolutionary fervor mingling with Enlightenment ideals. His diplomatic prowess would soon be tested as he worked to secure an alliance. Back in America, the conflict deepened. The arrival of Hessian mercenaries had transformed the battlefield into a crucible of ferocity. The mercenaries, with their disciplined formations and brutal tactics, posed a significant threat. Washington recognized that conventional strategies would not suffice. He summoned his command staff to a hastily arranged meeting, their faces illuminated by flickering lanterns in a dimly lit tent. "Gentlemen," Washington began, his voice steady, "the Hessians are a formidable force, and we must anticipate their every move. Their training is superior, but we have something they lack: a knowledge of this land and the will to fight for our homes." The men nodded, the gravity of the situation weighing heavily on their shoulders. Washington continued, "We will employ hit-and-run tactics, disrupt their supply lines, and strike when they least expect it. They fight for gold. We fight for freedom. That is our power." The tent filled with murmurs of agreement. Plans began to take shape, strategies forged in the fires of necessity. Meanwhile, in the midst of rising tensions, Johann Emil grappled with the consequences of his earlier choices. Assigned to the Hessians, he had found himself entrenched in a conflict that felt increasingly alien. The faces of the American soldiers haunted him, those young men who had fought with an intensity born from a desire for freedom. He witnessed their tenacity firsthand as they warded off attacks with an unwavering spirit. His heart stirred with a longing to be among them, yet he wore the uniform of an enemy. One evening, as the camp settled into an uneasy quiet, Emile sat apart from his fellow soldiers. The flicker of the campfire cast shadows on his troubled expression. Memories of home flooded his mind, his mother's laughter, the sense of fresh bread, and the warmth of community. But he had sworn an oath, and loyalty to the crown bound him. As he stared into the flames, the crackling embers mirrored the conflict in his heart, duty versus conscience. The next day, the Hessians advanced toward Trenton, unaware that Washington had anticipated their movements. Under the cover of darkness, he ordered his men to cross the icy Delaware River, the frigid water numbing their resolve but igniting their purpose. The night was fraught with peril, whispers of treachery echoing through the ranks, yet they pressed onward. As dawn broke, the American forces, emboldened by the chill of winter and the warmth of their aspirations, descended upon Trenton. The Hessians, taken by surprise, scrambled to defend their position. The battle erupted, musket fire roaring as the Americans charged forward, the hearts pounding with the rhythm of defiance. Emile stood among the Hessians, shot coursing through him as his comrades faltered under the unexpected attack. The sight of the charging Americans ignited a fire within him, allowing him to switch sides to fight alongside those who echoed the same cries of freedom he had felt deep within. As bullets whizzed past, the choice became clearer. He gripped his musket tightly, fighting against the swelling tide of confusion. He commanded the Hessian captain, his voice slicing through the chaos. The command sent a wave of gunfire into the advancing Americans, but Emile hesitated, torn between his duty to his fellow soldiers and the pull of his conscience. In that moment, a young colonial soldier fell mere feet away from him, a lifeblood staining the snow. Emile's heart raced. He dropped his weapon, the sound echoing louder than the gunfire around him. Enough, he shouted, and in an act of defiance, he stepped into view, arms raised as the battle raged on. The Hessian soldiers turned, confusion and outrage written on their faces. "I will not fight for tyranny. I choose to stand with those who seek freedom." His voice rang across the battlefield, a clarion call that sliced through the din of war. His act of defiance sent shockwaves through both sides. The Americans, recognizing the courage it took to stand against one's own, hesitated. Washington himself paused, eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. The Hessians, rattled and uncertain, faltered in their assault, unsure of how to respond to one of their own betraying their cause. In that crucial moment, some Hessian soldiers followed meticulously, dropping their weapons in solidarity. Others hesitated, caught in the tumult of loyalty versus morality. Washington seized the opportunity, rallying his men forward with renewed vigor. The tide had turned, and Emile found himself swept away in the swell of revolution. As the battle raged on into the afternoon, the Americans fought with a fervor that sent the Hessians reeling. The snow became stained with both blood and hope, and as the last of the Hessian forces retreated, victory surged through the American ranks. In the aftermath, as the smoke cleared and the chilling winds of winter swept across the battlefield, Washington stood among his soldiers, their faces glowing with triumph. "Today, we have proven that we may be outnumbered, but we are not outmatched," he declared, pride swelling in his chest. The flicker of liberty had ignited a flame that could no longer be extinguished. Meanwhile, the news of the stunning victory at Trenton reached France. Benjamin Franklin, sitting with a cadre of advisors in the lavish court of Louis Roman XVI, felt the weight of destiny shift. The tide of war in the colonies had captured France's imagination. The king leaned forward, intrigued by the audacity of these rebels, the whispers of alliance growing louder. But with victory came the specter of revenge. The British forces, humiliated by their loss, rallied their troops with a vengeance. The gloom settled over the American camp as the realization dawned: the fight for independence was far from over. The road ahead was littered with hardships, betrayals, and fresh confrontations. As Washington gathered his commanders, a sense of urgency filled the air. "We must prepare for the storm that is coming," he warned, eyes glimmering with resolve. "The British will not rest until they have reclaimed their honor. We can expect retaliation, and we must be ready." The faces of the men around him reflected the weight of his words. The victories they celebrated would soon become the shadows of their trials. As the sun set on the horizon, casting a golden hue over the battlefield, Emile stood with the American forces, a newfound sense of purpose coursing through him. The fires of liberty were alive in his heart, but he knew the struggle was only beginning. The next chapter of their saga waited, one that would weave together the fates of nations and reshape the world, igniting a legacy that would echo through history. The stakes were growing higher, and with them the promise of a fight that would resonate far beyond the shores of America. The echo of war and the quest for freedom beckoned, and the journey had only just begun. The next battle would not just be for survival, it would be for an identity forged in the flames of revolution, a struggle that would transcend borders and bind the destinies of allies and enemies alike. What awaited them all was a storm of conflict, a trial that would etch their names into the annals of history. The winter months stretched on, as relentless as the conflict that besieged the American colonies. Each morning, frost coated the soldiers' tents, and each evening brought the biting chill of uncertainty. The victory at Trenton had boosted morale, yet Washington understood that such triumphs were double-edged swords. The British were wounded but not defeated, and the battle for independence was only just heating up. News of the American victory traveled like wildfire, its embers igniting discussions across the Atlantic. In the opulent halls of Versailles, King Louis Roman XVI convened with his advisors, the atmosphere electric with the prospect of a new ally against Britain. Benjamin Franklin, resplendent in his ambassadorial attire, stood at the center of it all. "Your Majesty," he implored, "the time has come to recognize the Patriots' cause as one worthy of our support. The victories signal a shift, the tides of war are changing." The Franklin-esque words hung in the air, like a clarion call for action. As the king stroked his chin, deep in thought, his courtiers exchanged glances. Some were skeptical, convinced the American rebellion was merely a fleeting spark. But the thought of undermining British power was a tantalizing prospect. Louis' resolve solidified as he nodded slowly. "Let us extend our hand to these rebels. They fight for freedom alliance with our own ideals. It shall serve us well against our common foe." The seeds of an alliance were sown that day, soon to bear fruit in the form of military aid and resources. Back in America, Washington's forces prepared for the British response. The pressure mounted like a storm cloud on the horizon. With the remnants of the Hessian soldiers fleeing back to their homeland, Washington called for a council of war. He gathered his officers around a large wooden table in their makeshift headquarters. "We have tasted victory, but the road ahead will be fraught with peril. They will retaliate, and we must act swiftly," he urged. Beneath the lamp's flickering glow, the faces of men worn by war and time bore expressions of determination. "We cannot fight them in the open. Their numbers are too great," General Nathaniel Greene interjected. "We must employ our guerrilla tactics, disrupt their supply lines, and keep them guessing." Washington nodded, a spark of admiration igniting within him for the ingenuity of his officers. "Yes, we shall strike swiftly and retreat before they can mount a counter. We will be the shadows on the battlefield." These plans were set into motion. Johann M. Miller found himself enveloped in the chaos of war. Having fought alongside the Hessians, his convictions stood firm. He was no longer the conscripted soldier of the crown, but a man with a mission to forge his own identity amidst the tumult. Having witnessed the Americans' resolve, he sought to aid their cause. But how could he possibly convince them of his sincerity? In the dead of night, far from the sounds of battle, M. Miller slipped away from the Hessian camp. He moved silently through the frozen wilderness, the moon casting an eerie glow over the landscape. He held tightly to a scrap of parchment, a map detailing British supply routes that he had swiped from the Hessians' command post. This information was vital, a gift he hoped would earn him the trust of the Americans. As dawn approached, M. Miller arrived at an American outpost. Heart pounding, he stepped into the flickering light of the camp. Soldiers looked up, suspicion etched across their faces as he approached. "I come as a friend," he said, hands raised in surrender. "I am not your enemy." The sentry stepped forward, eyes narrowing. "How do we know you are not a spy?" M. Miller drew in a breath, summoning all his courage. "I have knowledge of the British supply lines. I can tell you where they were vulnerable. I fought with them, and now I wish to fight for you." The men exchanged glances, weighing his words. Finally, a familiar face emerged from the crowd. It was Samuel Adams. "I've seen men change sides before, often driven by fear or gold," he said, observing M. Miller closely. "But a soldier's heart, that is rare. Then test me," M. Miller replied, desperation coloring his voice. "I offer you what they do not, knowledge from within." Washington listened closely as M. Miller recounted the details he had memorized. The camp fell silent, tension hanging in the air. When he finished, a ripple of astonishment passed through the gathered officers. "This could give us the edge we need," Washington mused, his mind racing. "But what of your safety? Do you risk your life coming here?" "I risk nothing compared to those who stand for freedom," M. Miller declared, his voice resolute. Though skepticism lingered, Washington saw potential. "If you are willing, we shall accept your aid, but know this, trust must be earned." As night fell, the men devised a plan, strategizing around the intelligence M. Miller had provided. They would strike at dawn, targeting a vulnerable supply convoy carrying arms and provisions from British-held New York City to the front lines. The risk was considerable, but the potential for crippling the enemy was too great to ignore. On the eve of the assault, tension crackled in the air. The men prepared their weapons, the weight of their resolve palpable. Emler, now fully immersed in the American cause, felt a rush of adrenaline as he shared tales with his newfound comrades. The bonds of brotherhood forged in the fires of conflict strengthened against the looming storm. As the sun rose, casting a vibrant orange hue over the horizon, Washington's forces took their positions. They moved like phantoms through the snow-laden woods, the crunch of boots muffled by the thick blanket of winter grass. Emler, now wearing a soldier's uniform, felt a sense of belonging wash over him. He was no longer just a conscripted boy, he was part of something monumental. The convoy appeared in the distance, guarded by British soldiers unaware of the impending ambush. Washington signaled to his men, hearts pounding in unison as they waited for the perfect moment. The tension was taut, a bowstring ready to snap, and then it happened. Charge! Washington shouted, and a collective roar erupted from the Americans as they surged forward, pouring out of the trees like a flood. The element of surprise struck like lightning, catching the British off guard. Musket fire filled the air, the crack of bullets mingling with the shouts of combatants. Emler felt the adrenaline surge through him, his hand steady on his musket. This was his moment of truth. He fought with fervor, a mixture of fear and exhilaration driving him onward. He moved with the Americans, dodging enemy fire as the battle unfolded around him, a chaotic symphony of war. As the dust settled and the last of the British soldiers fled into the woods, victory surged through the ranks. The convoy lay in ruins, supplies secured. Cheers erupted, but amidst the jubilation, the weight of the cost began to settle in. Lives had been lost, but another step had been taken toward independence, each victory a stitch in the fabric of their emerging nation. In the aftermath, Washington gathered his officers, his expression a mix of pride and determination. Today, we have shown what unity and purpose can achieve. We will continue to fight for the freedom that binds us, he declared, his voice echoing through the ranks. Emler stood among them, his heart swelling with pride. He had fought for a cause greater than himself, and in doing so, he had found his place in history. Yet, as the cheers faded into the distance, he felt the weight of what lay ahead. The British would not easily surrender their colonies, and the war was only just beginning. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the battlefield, Emler knew that the next chapter would be fraught with uncertainty and peril. Echoes of the past whispered in the wind, a reminder of the continued struggle for liberty. But with each victory, they were one step closer to forging an identity, one that would transcend borders and shape the world in ways yet unknown. The promise of alliances and betrayals loomed, and as the fires of revolution crackled in the night, the question remained, would the quest for freedom bind them together, or would the chaos of war fracture their resolve? The answer awaited them in the struggles yet to unfold, where heroes would rise, and destinies would be forever altered. The journey continued, with the flicker of liberty guiding their way through the darkness that lay ahead. As the dawn broke over the American colonies, casting a new light on the battle-scarred landscape, George Washington gathered his troops near the remnants of the ambushed convoy. The chill of winter found its way through the soldiers' thin uniforms, but the warmth of victory ignited a spark in their hearts. They had dealt a significant blow to British forces, yet the spectre of retaliation loomed like a dark cloud on the horizon. Today we have tasted the fruits of our labor, Washington addressed the men, his voice steady, but do not let this victory deceive you into thinking the war is won. Our enemies will strike back, and we must be prepared. The soldiers nodded, their expressions resolute, understanding the gravity of the moment. Among them, Johann Emler felt a surge of belonging, now fully embracing the cause of liberty he had once only glimpsed from the sidelines. Word of the ambush spread like wildfire across the colonies, galvanizing support for the revolution. The momentum shifted in favor of the Patriots, but their struggle was far from over. In the months that followed, the British regrouped, determined to reclaim their honor and authority over the colonies. They dispatched reinforcements, including some of the most seasoned troops and commandos, intent on quashing the rebellion once and for all. In the court of King Louis Roman XVI, Benjamin Franklin's efforts bore fruit as the French king finally decided to formally recognize the American cause. This is the moment we've awaited, an alliance that could turn the tide against our mutual foe, Franklin proclaimed, his eyes gleaming with determination. The French government pledged support, sending military supplies and troops to aid the Americans. The news ignited hope in the colonies, a flicker of strength bolstering their resolve. However, within the American camp, tensions simmered. Loyalists still lurked among the populace, feeding discontent and sowing seeds of distrust. Suspicion grew as the British forces began to tighten their grip on key cities, launching a campaign to divide and conquer. The battle for New York City raged on, a pivotal conflict that would determine the fate of the revolution. Washington's strategy was clear: the city must be protected at all costs. He called for a council of war, the officers gathering around the table once more, maps spread out before them. "We will not engage in open combat unless pressed," he declared, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "Instead, we will harry the British forces, drawing them into the wilderness. We shall employ tactics that will outsmart them at every turn." The officers exchanged determined glances, their minds racing as they plotted the next steps. Emler, now fully integrated into Washington's ranks, felt a new sense of purpose. "We know the terrain better than they do," he chimed in, leaning over the maps. "We can harness the rivers and forests to ambush their patrols and supplies." As the campaign unfolded, the British found themselves increasingly frustrated by the American tactics. Skirmishes erupted in the woods as colonial militia struck from the shadows, disrupting supply lines and cutting off communication. Each encounter left the British demoralized, questioning their ability to hold the colonies. Despite their victories, the Americans faced hardships. The winter of 1777 was brutal, and the men suffered from frostbite, hunger, and despair. Washington established his winter quarters at Valley Forge, where the spirit of the men would be tested. "We shall emerge from this winter stronger," he told his troops, rallying their spirits. "Let us use this time to prepare to train and to fortify our resolve." As the bitter cold settled in, Emler took it upon himself to bolster the morale of the men. He organized drills and exercises, sharing his knowledge of European warfare with the American troops. They trained tirelessly, understanding that their ability to adapt to the battlefield would determine their fate. In the heart of the encampment, the spirit of camaraderie flourished. Emler and other soldiers shared stories of home, their dreams interwoven with visions of a free America. Bonds were forged in the shadow of adversity, a resolve to fight for the ideals of justice and liberty that resonated through every heart. Meanwhile, across the sea, the British commanders were growing increasingly frustrated. General Howe, a seasoned leader, faced pressure from London to quash the rebellion decisively. Yet, each time he sought to engage, Washington's cunning strategies thwarted him. The war theater became a chessboard, each side vying for advantage, but Washington played the long game. In the spring of 1778, the first glimmers of hope emerged. News arrived of the French alliance, and the realization struck like a thunderbolt among the British ranks. "We are not facing just rebels now," an officer lamented in a private meeting with General Howe. "We are facing a coalition." The shifting tides of war inspired new strategies on both sides. Washington knew the French alliance would elevate their capabilities, but it also made each engagement more critical. The British would respond with ferocity, seeking to contain the revolution before it could spread like wildfire. On the American front, the months of training bore fruit as new battles erupted. The engagement at Monmouth proved to be a turning point. Washington's forces met the British head-on, and the fighting raged through the day, a brutal clash of wills. Emler fought valiantly, his heart pounding as he maneuvered alongside his comrades. The air was thick with smoke, the sounds of muskets and cannon fire blending into a cacophony of chaos. As the battle intensified, a sudden realization struck Emler. This was not merely a fight for land, it was a fight for a new identity, a nation forged in the flames of revolution. He fought not just for himself, but for the dreams of countless others who had longed for this moment of freedom. This struggle continued through the scorching summer, culminating in the historic victory at Yorktown in 1781. Washington, now commanding a united force comprising American and French troops, laid siege to the British stronghold, determined to bring the war to a close. Emler stood among them, witnessing the culmination of years of sacrifice and struggle. As the British forces surrendered, a wave of emotion swept through the Americans. Cheers erupted, echoing through the fields as soldiers embraced one another, their hearts swelling with pride and relief. The dream of independence was within reach, a testament to their resilience. Back in Europe, the reverberations of the American victory began to shake the foundations of empires. The idea of liberty echoed across nations, inspiring uprisings and revolutionary fervor. In Germany, voices began to rise, envisioning a future free from oppression. And in the halls of Versailles, King Louis Roman XVI recognized the implications of this newfound spirit. Yet as the war drew to a close, the challenges were far from over. The fledgling nation faced the monumental task of forging a government, of uniting disparate colonies into a cohesive whole. The echoes of war had faded, but the battle for the soul of America was just beginning. Himmler, now a symbol of unity between the American and German fronts, reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He had chosen a path of freedom over loyalty, embodying the very principles that had driven the revolution. Standing among the soldiers at Yorktown, he understood that the fight for identity would continue long after the last musket fell silent. As the sun set over the American landscape, the promise of a new dawn loomed on the horizon. The flicker of liberty had transformed into a beacon of hope, illuminating the path ahead. The question remained, could the ideals born from the crucible of war survive the trials of peace? In that moment, Himmler knew that the answer lay in the hearts of those who dared to dream. The journey of the American Revolution was not just a chapter in history, it was a testament to the enduring spirit of humanity, a relentless pursuit of freedom that would resonate for generations to come. The legacy of their struggle would shape the future, intertwining destinies across continents, forever changing the world.